Just since the outbreak. Good afternoon, everybody.
Afternoon, Professor.
Good afternoon.
So how are things today?
Pretty good. It's been a quiet day at home. What about you?
It's a nice day today. Warm, some sunshine. Still no fiber optic cable, but we're working on it.
They haven't
We're on
come
the
back
high-
yet?
No, haven't come back yet.
All right, well, let's hope next time he has all his tools, yeah?
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. Fingers crossed. Okay, so for today, I had you guys read the rest of the chapter in Maza. Before I start, I should probably actually do attendance. I would like to know what you guys thought about the readings, though. So yeah, just take a second, think about the readings, and if you have any thoughts, reactions to that part of the chapter from like E.P. Thompson on. Is that your hand up, Annika?
Yeah. I was just gonna say that I thought it was particularly interesting her introduction of infrapolitics in the section that we read. And I think that when studying history and learning about colonization and subordination, that historians also look at like the magnitude in which people resisted or the ways in which they did so, and how like the seemingly trivial aspect of day-to-day life, as Maz explained, were crucial in restoring agency to marginalized groups.
Yeah, so like the part about like the slaves and how they were sort of exercising agency in very small ways that had that were, you know, for them significant, and that led to their having some say over their own lives. That was indeed, I think, an interesting point. Just looking to see if I can get everyone's names up here. All right, let's see, Matthew's here. I can't see Allison on this screen. Are you here, Allison?
Yeah, I'm here.
Ah, okay, thank you. Is where to like list the names? I wonder. I don't know. All right, let's just do this the easy way. Carolyn, are you here?
Yeah, here.
Okay. Let's see, Benjamin, I saw that you're there. Gabriella.
Here.
Gabriella, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, thank you. Brian, are you there?
Which one?
Brian Chan or Chan, not sure which
Yeah.
one.
That's me. Right here.
Okay. Ah, got it. So is it Brian Chan? Is that good?
Yeah, Chan is fine. Yeah.
Okay, good. Nicholas Cipriani. Okay. Mia, I thought I saw you somewhere. Okay. Kyle. Hannah, are you here or there? Troy, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Thank you. Saw Evan, saw Carl, saw Aviva, saw Ellie. Samuel Grossfeld.
I'm here.
All right, thank you. Ian. Trey Lawson.
Here.
All right, thank you. Caitlin, not here today. I knew that. Rose.
Here.
Thank you. All right. Brian McMahon.
Here.
Okay. Matthew Moriarty. Anna Pelletieri. Anna.
Yes, hi.
Hi. Isaiah Perez.
Right.
Okay. Nancy. Zachary Richards.
Here.
Thank you. Jonathan Roy.
Here.
Okay.
I don't have my video on. Does that matter?
It'd be good to have it on later if you can, but for now it's okay. Let's see. Maya, I saw your name up there. Owen.
Here.
All right. Sitting outside, very nice, Owen. I like that. Deb and Justin, are you there? Justin Young. Yep. All right. Good. Okay. So, sort of other comments that you had on the readings. I liked what. First person to speak today. I like what Annika had to say about these subtle and sometimes hard to see forms of resistance. Other comments or thoughts you had on as part of the chapter? Benjamin, yeah.
I liked how Maza kind of covered how social histories went from like a bunch of numbers and graphs about a large population of people to during the 20th century being a much more intersectional or inclusive, like more diverse field of histories for like women and minorities, and seeing how they either resisted oppression in the past or seeing how their lives were different from how we perceived them initially.
Okay, yeah. So two good points there, right? The idea that there is sort of this trajectory, right, of over time of moving from abstraction or from random facts about people that don't really matter to really having more information about the actors, and also in sort of seeing inside their lives and learning more about how sort of the labels that society has put on them do or don't match what they actually are experiencing. Yeah, very, very well put. Yeah, Rose.
Okay. Hi. I thought it was interesting how she posed a question: does social history have to mean the history of the impoverished majority? I think that's on page 27. And I like how she addressed that it shouldn't only just be about the lower classes and like the social history of the upper classes.
Yeah, like the upper classes also are social, right? They're still people, and they still exercise in their own lives all kinds of agency, and even beyond the sort of beneath the level of those who are actually in power, the ruling class as a whole, right? They have a lot of things to show us about society, and they're interested in the study as well. So that was, I think, also. I also found that to be interesting. I hadn't thought about that very much, that they are sort of worthy study. I work on a lot of people who are actually elites, the educated elite, and so I hadn't thought about the fact that people might not sort of call that social history, but it is. So that, I think, is a good point, Rose. Okay, so today I have like 5 different things I want to do, and we'll see. We'll get through some of them, I hope, today. I want to sort of talk about the E.P. Thompson sort of, grassroots, thinking about historical actors who are part of the working poor. Like, who are they? How do we get to know them, and sort of what we're talking about? I'm sure that you've had classes that talked about people who do difficult labor for little money. But I thought we could just sort of take a second before we get too far into the theory of all this, talk about the experience of the people. It's actually a global phenomenon, right? It's not just an American question or a British question. It's actually global. And I'm going to actually just share my slide with you for a second to talk about the working poor. Because really that is the majority of humanity, are people who work very hard and don't make enough money to live, well, at the very least. So let's do a screen share. Okay. So one of the things that we realize in looking at labor history, and then later on social history of people who labor, is that they're really it's pretty ubiquitous. And if we think about, the UK, for example, and we think about the areas that had important coal mines that now have mostly shut down, but there's still quite a few, but they're mostly shut down. These are the coal mining areas of Great Britain. This is that, I mean, the part that you see here that's the brown, those are the loads, right, of coal, but the entire sort of region around them are people that work or depend upon the mines, right? So that's, all of South Wales, Cumberland, and all of this area here as well, up before you get to Scotland. All these areas, they relied upon coal. And so any history that you're writing about Great Britain, these large swaths of land and therefore people who worked in coal, for example, they're really part of that story. If we look at the United States, this is a US map here of coal regions around 1900 and 1906. We can see that the areas that were most heavily invested in coal mining were Western Pennsylvania, all the way down here into the Appalachian Range, and Kentucky and Tennessee as well. But also, if we go over towards the Midwest, we have quite a bit over there as well of coal mining regions, and this is just talking about coal. So so again, if you think about how these societies are structured, how the social history of Midwest, or of the coal mining regions of the edge of, for example, the Midwest, Ohio and Western Pennsylvania, those areas really are tied to the coal mining industry, and so the lives of the miners who lived there, those who lived near them, who worked them, those kinds of things. And I think that it's easy to sort of talk about U.S. history and to overlook these people, but this is a lot of people, right, that lived in this area and still do today. And many of whom are right now trying to figure out if coal is an option that they can get back into, for better or for worse. Let's, if we look over at Germany, for example, this is the Ruhr Valley here in Germany. I'm not sure you can see that map, but this is the area in sort of Western Germany where coal was very prominent. And all this pink area on this green map are showing the population concentration of people, and these are all around major coal mines in Essen and Bochum and Dortmund. And people, today, no one mines coal there anymore. That's far in their rearview mirror. But the people that live there now have all moved. These populations had grown. These had grown in the wake of coal. Today, actually, there's a museum to mine workers in Bochum, which you can go see, and there are wax figures like these to remind visitors of the history of coal mining and how difficult it was, how dangerous it was, and that people shouldn't probably do it anymore if they don't have to. If we go to Japan, which is my country that I work on, so I go back to Japan a lot, but these are Japan's major coal mines for the most part. And this country has had, a coal mining industry for 5 centuries, but it really picked up a lot during the Industrial Revolution. During the Japanese Industrial Revolution, so around 1870, 1880, the coal mines there really picked up. And I wanted to show you something. This is actually an island called Hashima Island, which is, if I go back to the map here, it's over here off the coast of Nagasaki. It was an entire island built for coal miners, and then it was built to use the latest technology to mine coal that was actually in the ocean. So they built an entire island of concrete. They call it Gunkan, or sort of like battleship island, because it kind of looks like a battleship, the outline of this island. But it really just, I think, also speaks to the kind of environment that it was. And this picture here is towards the end of its life, this island. But you can see people living in crowded conditions. and and houses that are all exactly the same, and an effort to make it look nice doesn't necessarily succeed. So the life of the working poor is the life of the majority, and that's the kind of history that social historians are trying to get at, if they're working on the lower classes in particular. And it's important to keep these people in mind. What I wanted to do next was to talk about the working poor and how, and also at the same time about sort of on primary source analyses. So if we think about the working poor, they're not like necessarily, especially up until the 20th century, the 20th century, they're not like writing, autobiographies, and they're not keeping careful notes, letters to friends, and those kinds of things. So it's hard to get that history. And for today, I wanted us to look at two different things. One thing I asked you to do was to do a primary source analysis worksheet. So let me just sort of see if you were able to do that. Raise your hand so I can just get an idea of that. The worksheet that was on Moodle. See a few hands up. Okay, good. Okay, lots of hands up. Good. All right. So if you could just get that out right now, I'm going to actually have you work on that a bit in your groups. So this document that I had you look at is the excerpts from a report by Edwin Chadwick. And so at the end, I asked you some questions, and I'd like for you guys to get in your groups and work on that. So I'm going to put you into some groups. Probably actually pretty small groups, and I'd like for you to talk about these questions, and then I'm going to ask you to come back and talk about those with me in a second. So I'm going to stop my screen share, and I'm going to okay, that's good, Rose. Thanks for that. That's a good idea. In the chat. Okay, so I'm going to put you all into breakout rooms. Okay, so you're going to get a request to join, so please join those. And your goal is just to kind of go through the questions I asked you about the primary source that you're reading, and just make sure that you're on the same page, and that you'll probably spend the most time on things like who is it written for and what's the main argument. And also, I'm curious what the secondary argument will be that you're finding as well. So anyway, just get on that, and I'm going to let you guys work on that. looks like we're mostly back in, I think. Yeah. So I had you guys do this worksheet because I think that as historians, the most important thing that you can take away from this class, from any class that any sort of history work that you do, you can use this in whatever you choose to do. If you're going to be a lawyer, if you're going to be in business, whatever it might be, is to think carefully about your document, your text. If you're doing other kinds of research on things that are not textual, it's a bit different, but a lot of the same rules apply. To take the time to think about where this comes from, what is the author trying to convey, why they're trying to convey that, and sort of what are the biases of the author. We sort of got started on this a little bit last class, and we're going even deeper today with this assignment. And it's really important to give attention to that detail before you begin to analyze the content. These other factors are very important as well. So I had you look at an excerpt from Edwin Chadwick's report. I will tell you more about it afterwards, but I want to see what you had to say about it. So you're in pretty small groups. I'm just going to sort of go through some of these and get going. So the first thing to think about is, how do we classify this source? What kind of primary source is this? Brian McMahon, can you tell me in your group, how did you guys answer that question? How would you guys answer that question?
So it's like an official government document, because like it's a report. Somebody went in and reported for the Law of Commissioners.
Okay, so it's a government document. It's a record or report, and you mentioned someone went in. So that this is actually that it is an investigative kind of report, right? Very good. Okay, Allison, how did your group answer that question, Allison Audette?
We said that it was a government report written by the Poor Law Commission that was analyzing how the labor class was living and then providing solutions to try to remedy the conditions because they weren't that great.
Okay, so it's a report and it's also a recommendation. So that's I think a good thing to add to your response there. Very good. Okay, where is the document from? Owen, how did your group answer that question?
We just said it was from London, England.
Okay, from London. Anything else worth adding to that? This is open to anybody. That seems pretty good to me, but I'm curious. Other responses to that besides London, England? Carl, yeah?
We said it was
Industrial Revolution.
From the Poor Law Commissioners who investigated problems of community health and proposed solutions for them.
Okay, so there's so the where is not just the location, but it's also the context of sort of who developed this document, right? And that I think is useful. Okay, when was it? What's the time period when this was created? Let's see, Gabriella, how about you?
I just said it was published in 1842, but I think it said something about how he started his research in like 1838. So.
Okay, good. So even though what we see is a document that was presented to the Parliament, by the Commission, the research was going on before that, and so it's also relevant. Okay, very good. So knowing that it was written that it was finished in 1842, what do you know about the historical context of that time that would help us to understand what is being said here and how it's being said and why and those kinds of things? Let's see. How about Brian Chen?
This was like during the period of the Industrial Revolution. pollution in Britain. So there was like massive people moving into like urban areas, and there were less jobs, and well, there were more opportunities in like urban areas, but as people clustered into urban areas, living conditions started to decrease as there was less space for more people.
Okay, so very good, right? So the key word that you mentioned there is this great dynamic of industrialization, which is leading to unprecedented urbanization, and also population growth, which is leading to problems with sanitation. Well put. Who is the author of this text? Deb.
Whoops. Sorry, I think can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yep, we can hear
Okay,
you.
sorry. There's something happened with my computer. Edward Chadwick.
Okay, so who was that? Like, what do you know about him before you read about him more on Google or whatever? What do you know about this person?
He was like the commissioner for the sanitation conditions.
Okay.
So he was like, I guess like probably some kind of I'm trying to think of the right wording, but it was his job to like oversee the sanitation procedures in that area. And I guess it was like England and Wales as well.
Yeah, very much so, right? So he was a lawyer and he was a social reformer, and then he was the person who sort of by his own pressure on the government was appointed to do this commission. So that's important to know as well. Thank you for that, Deb. So who is this document written for? Who is the target audience for this document? I'm going to throw that out there to whoever wants to answer the question. You can just raise your hand so I can see. Isaiah, yeah.
I wrote a bit. It was to like Parliament, because they were like the law body.
Okay, so Parliament needed this information. So that's pretty good. I can go with that. That's definitely the right answer. Are there other right answers as well? Sam, yeah.
I was going to say just like general government officials, because this wouldn't just go to just Parliament. This would be other people in sanitation, or other parts of like Moral Commission and other things that would be happening at the time.
Okay, right. So the government as a whole that deals with population of London in particular should be able to see this document, right? That's a really good point as well. I will add more to that later. Okay. What is the main argument of this text? Maya, can you give us a sort of a summary of the text's main argument?
Sure. I said that the main argument was that like issues of overcrowding and poor sanitation were leading to the spread of disease, especially in lower class, like working class areas. And so the best way to stop the spread of disease was to try and improve sanitation conditions, especially by cleaning the water, and try to separate people so they weren't all living together in like crowded houses.
Okay, so that was really well put, succinct, I think summary of the main argument. Is there like a secondary argument going on here that's maybe a little bit less visible? There's not always a second argument, but usually there's something you can look for. So are you getting anything else from this text that might be worth mentioning? I think I saw Kyle's hand up.
Yeah, so actually we went over this in our breakout room. There's like a secondary argument almost made for like the opportunity cost and the economics of having so many people living in terrible sanitation conditions. Basically, there's an argument where like there's a net benefit to improving the welfare of that many people, because when you have like orphans in the street, people with dead parents, that much sickness, lost wage hours, you actually lose out on value and utility as opposed to bringing everyone up to a certain level.
Okay, right. So the country as a whole is suffering economically because of all of the loss of all the death and the orphan making process. Um, there was a word for that he used that I thought was interesting. But anyway, the loss of parents for children, and that is worth thinking about. Yeah, definitely. Ellie.
So, oh, and then this is also, I think linked to the time period that the source is from. But there was also a good deal of mentioning, like, but besides the I guess tangible, practical benefits for both the poor and lower classes and the people just in society in general, there was a, a pretty strong focus on morals as well, which makes sense given that it was the Victorian era where like public morals and decency was considered to be very important. But I thought it was interesting the fact that they said that that the population so exposed is less susceptible of moral influences, and the effects of education are more transient than with the healthy population. And so I thought it was interesting that they would bring that up as a point, and I think it says something about the culture at the time that they would use that as one of their primary arguments in the piece.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Edwin Chadwick was definitely a moral reformer as well, right? And he and those like him believed that the social uplift was as important as everything else. It's the economics of this question, and that the people deserved to have proper morals and to behave morally, and that they couldn't do that if they were living in filth and in poor conditions. That was, I think, really well put. So the moral and the physical go together in this context. That's definitely a good secondary argument the text is making as well. So lastly, last two questions are sort of thinking outside the box a little bit. What kinds of information do we get from this text we couldn't get from another kind of text, a kind of source? This is towards the end. Some of you didn't get to it. It's going to see if any of you are raising your hands on that. Troy, anything on that question?
Yeah, I said hold on, that it provides, like all primary sources do, it provides an account of the conditions during the time period, but it also is someone who's looking to the personal like side of it, someone who wants to find solutions to benefit the people and even he says, like you said, the economy in England.
Okay, so this is a source that's slanted towards the perspective of this reformer who wants to fix things, and that gives us his point of view on the problem and how to fix it. Okay, yeah. Thank you for that. Evan, yeah.
I think it being a report is also very important because it's not just like a diary entry where it's written from someone living there's perspective. Although he witnessed and saw how unsanitary the conditions were, he also can offer statistics and kind of sort of those types of like data that also helps give a perspective.
Okay, yeah. So this is a document that has a lot of specifics that someone looking from above or from outside can provide. Someone who's also taking a relatively scientific approach to this problem can provide, and this makes it a rich source for that, for those exact reasons, and different from a diary. Okay, that I think is also well put. The last thing I asked you is, what else would be useful to look at when you're looking at this kind of topic? And I think that you have answered the questions in your responses, but I'm curious what you might have to say beyond a diary. So yeah, Herrick.
Oh, well, so I was just gonna actually say like a first-hand account of the working class members that would have to be at it. So I guess kind of like what you just said, a diary, but also maybe something like census records would be something that could be useful in analyzing, like say like census records before like these changes were made and after.
Okay, so yeah,
or
like
health
looking at the census data, looking at that could be useful to figure out just how much population, how long are people living, how many children are being born, what's the birth rate, those kinds of things, where are they living? Those questions are useful. And then I think there are all kinds of firsthand accounts. Diaries is one, but there are others as well that could be useful too. Yeah. So let's actually move on. I wanted something else quickly, and then we're going to move away from the workers. But I thought we could take a look at something else. So what I just had you talk about and read was from a report. But I think that you might be sort of assume that because of how this played out, that when you read a report, it will always look like this, and that's not necessarily the case. The workers' voices are not actually very present in this. The poor classes' voices are sort of, they're just not present at all. I'm going to put a document for us to look at briefly here, and so we can sort of see something a little bit different. So what I'll just say in closing about Chadwick's report was that it is the report that led to the creation of London's sanitation system, London's sewer system, built largely by Edward Bazalgette, to remove human waste and other kinds of waste away from people's homes and towards towards water sources that could carry them away, and then also lots of rules about what you could and could not put into cesspits in people's homes, and it really does a lot to begin to clean up London after a great cholera outbreak in 1834. This is one of the things that allows London to begin to have a healthier life for the lower classes. So this is another document, also a parliamentary paper from England, but I think, as you'll see, it's quite different in what it does. So this is evidence given before a committee, the committee by Mr. Sadler, who is also trying to get something to change. He is trying to draw attention to the factory workers' living conditions and also child labor. So I just want us to take a look at it briefly, and we'll just talk about it briefly, and then we'll go on to the next thing. So I'm going to share my screen with you, and we'll just kind of scroll down and read a few of these and see how it's different from the other one. Okay, so can you see my screen? Yes, okay, all right, so I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. So each of these is someone who's called in, and Sadler is asking them questions, which he's trying to get certain answers from them to pinpoint how bad things are. So just read through a few of these, please. Three S's, by the way, is 3 shillings. Okay, let's just go through one more and then we can talk about it. Okay, so let's stop there. All right, so this is a little bit different, the format, I think, as you can see. So let's go through a few of the same questions. What is the author trying to get across here in this? What's the message in this report of the examinations that he's holding before Parliament?
The authors showing to Parliament like the living conditions that children had to experience when working in mills and stuff. But
yeah, so we're talking about child labor and those conditions. Do you feel like the worker's voice comes through in this text?
Yes, because it's a Q&A. I think that it does come through.
Okay, right. So we do hear the workers speaking. We see that the person writing this down, recording this, has taken the words of the worker there. Do we also get a clear perspective of the author's point of view as well? What do you think?
Yes, no, you can go.
You can.
Okay.
Sorry, I was going to say yes in the questions he asks. It becomes really clear what he's trying to get out of the answers.
Okay. So one thing we'll see a little later in class when we're looking at primary sources is that even conversations that are recorded can, have a slant, have a purpose, and looking at the point of view and the goals of the asker of questions and during like an interrogation, for example, can be important context for you as you decipher what's actually going on. So this is the background for the poor laws, which were passed in the 1832, 33, just after this, and which do begin to limit things like how long children can work, the number of working days per week, those kinds of things in England. So when we talk about the history of the working class, these are the kinds of sources that are most easily available now. These are very top-down sources from Parliament. But there are others too. But these are a couple that I thought we could look at, and we can see already that you can base your research on just what elite reformers are trying to do, or you can begin to incorporate the voices of those workers who are not writing things down for the most part, but who are, in this case, appearing in documents that we can access. Okay, I want to shift gears and talk for the last part of class about the question of women's history. So first of all, let's sort of talk about women's history. This is, I mean, I work right now quite a bit on women's history, and this is an area I'm very interested in. I'm going to stop my screen share, by the way. But thinking back to the author, to what you read in Maza, let's talk a bit about this first question of why does women's history matter? I mean, it is easy to see women's history as just an additive history, that it's just there because we need to include women in the story. So we need to add some women until it makes, you know, the story more diverse, more inclusive, fuller. But you know, how much that you really need before you can just say, okay, that's enough, right? We have enough women now, the story is balanced. I would argue that that's not really a good enough reason for us to do women's history. So I wanted to ask you, why does women's history matter? I see a couple hands. Yeah, Benjamin.
I know Miles was kind of getting to this point, but like the classical interpretation of history is that like men are the movers of history, but women's history is constantly intertwined with men's history because men and women are constantly interacting with each other, whereas like a slave and his master might only interact like sparingly. So she said to have a full picture of any historical movement or event, you have to understand women's role in it as well.
Okay, right. So because women and men's lives are so, you know, thickly intertwined, you're missing half the story of what's happening if you don't have women's, you know, history included in that. So I can go with that. Why else does it matter? Anna.
I'm going to push back slightly against that narrative just because we shouldn't frame women's history in terms of men's history. Like, I think that when you say like women's history matters because it's intertwined with men's history, that still puts women in like the like supporting role in terms of history. And I think one of the other reasons is just because women often have a perspective that men don't have. For example, when men write history, you don't see things like history of like sex workers. You don't see things like history of like childcare. You don't see things that have traditionally been women's roles incorporated, period, into history. And so I think women's stories hold on their own a lot of power with or without the supplement of men. And then I think that like those are just parts of history that are, again, they are history, and so they're worth studying. That's the whole point of studying history. And yet they don't often get incorporated simply because they're women's history exclusively.
Okay, I think I see most of what you said there. I'm not sure that like women's history by women is necessarily like that like these topics would not be covered by men as well. That might be a little bit of a jump for sort of what I mean, what a historian who is a woman would choose to focus on. There's some assumptions that you're making there, I think. But the idea that men as historians have focused on certain topics, right? That this is very clear.
Sorry, to clarify, I didn't mean historians. I meant like in the time period. Like you often don't see like historical records of.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Sorry,
okay.
I didn't mean to like say that male historians. I know a lot of male historians, a lot of females who chose not to focus on female subjects or whatever. So I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah. So so the kinds of sources that we can get, right? From looking at women, they will give an insight into areas that focusing on men will not allow us to have. That's definitely true. And I think you're talking also about sort of whose history matters because they're probably with men's history. I think it's more a question of history is, you know, perhaps ungendered, right? And we're looking at it, and if we see an event happening, you know, that we assume is being carried out by an important man, for example, then we realize that that's not the entire picture what we're seeing. Those are really good points you both made there. So let me ask you, how do we get info on women's history? I mean, today it's much easier, I would say, than before. But how do we get at sources that will allow us to see, as Anna was mentioning, sort of the lives and the things that women's history can show us?
I think that there's a lot of records that show women's history throughout history without necessarily meaning to. And I feel like a lot of times that's where you have to go. Like things like a lot of like religious records, especially like European history. Like we know a lot about like medieval family life and like the lives of women because of things like church records and like convent records and things like that. Like it's just like for so much of history, it wasn't documented through the lens of being women's history, but it's still there. You just have to like look for it.
Yeah, right. So it's a question of perspective, right? You can look at this as it's something incomplete, or you can actually incorporate the history of women that you can find through this, and you can get these things. That's a really good point. So where else can we find women's history, sources for women's history? Yeah, Deb.
Also, you can find them in places like diaries and personal letters. There's a lot of information that's gathered about a lot of different events, like about wars and things like that, by the letters and diaries that women kept during those times.
So women who are literate and able to write, who are keeping diaries and journals, and who are also who are writing to other women as well, or sometimes to men. Those can be good sources as well. Yeah, definitely. So I think what's coming up is that it's actually not that hard to find sources for women's history. People just haven't been interested in finding those sources until this sort of cultural turn of the 60s began to make this sort of an important thing. I know that my advisor, who is a woman, told me many stories about being discouraged from doing women's history, and I found that Maza says that they were told, first you should write a book on a topic that is male centered, or that interests male historians, and then your second book can be about women, right? And my advisor was told that, and I've heard that story elsewhere as well. And so this is a true, not a made up. This is a true thing that I've heard quite a few times. But today we're in a position to actually call women's history part of social history, and I wanted to ask you about that. How is women's history social history? It's kind of a big question, and I'm not sure it makes sense, but I'm thinking about categories from the book. And one of the things that came across was that sometimes historians have thought women's history was not tied very much to social history. It was sort of like just a separate thing, biographical separate thing. So in what ways is women's history social history? Herrick.
Well, it can definitely, inform upon things like cultural values, practices, customs, that are, like pervasively throughout the society, depending on the different sources.
Okay, right. So the social, the social values and customs and those kinds of things can be gotten at through women's history, not just men's history or male focused history. Definitely. In what way is, for example, a study of a household social history, or how can it be that? Ian. Yeah.
I think studying like individual families is really important to what a society is. Like you could think about society, like recent American society, and like the rise of the nuclear family or the fall of the nuclear family, and how everyone has their roles within society, and that's reflective of families as well.
Okay, so the story of the household or the family is definitely sort of is part of what's happening at the larger social level, the large level of society, and as we see changes happening in the smaller microcosm, we see them happening as well in macrocosm. I can go with that. Other thoughts on that, on how sort of, you know, for example, how about like marriage or a married couple, looking at that from the point of view of women's history, how can that be part of this larger discussion of social history? Yeah, Kyle?
I think like in the concept of marriage, it's really useful to make a specific example to talk about like marriage through the lens of men versus women, especially like after the 1960s. So like I know traditionally, very traditionally, marriage has been like sort of a joining of estates type thing. It can be political, what have you, and even till pretty recently, women were barred from divorcing their husbands in certain countries. And you know now with like the popular women's movement, you can see how like the women's voice has in many ways been taken into more consideration, and like how that's changed the institution of marriage.
Okay, right. So it's actually not difficult to see that marriage as an institution is a social structure, right, and that it is a form of exchange, a form of control or power, or at least interaction. It's very much social, right? And you can look at that from the point of view of just the institution. You can look at the point of view from women's history and looking at how women have, been involved with that institution, how they thought about the institution, and how they experienced it. So I think that's those are some really good points. What I wanted to finish with was sort of trying to work together to create like a lineage or an idea tree of how we got from big man history, over here, to the chapter. It comes to an end with like LGBTQ history, and so I want to sort of see if we can together think about how historians have come from considering just major historical figures, usually who were political figures, with a few exceptions, to perhaps not very well known average Joe LGBTQ individuals being their subjects. So, what are some of the steps along the way that took us from point A to point B here? What are some turning points or some moments of change? Just kind of looking around here for hands. I don't see many hands. Maybe I'm gonna call on to people. How about Nancy? Any ideas of things that connected the big man history to marginalized groups like LGBTQ history?
Yeah, Maza brings up something about the publication of George Chauncey's Gay New York in 1994. So I think like that kind of interested me a little bit because it talks more about like the difference between like gay history and I guess like lesbian history. So I think bringing like big figures into gay history helped more with that because like women were seen as more like affectionate and girly. So I think it wasn't really looked into as much as I think gay history was kind of like more, I don't know what the word is, but like it just like brought more attention, I guess. So she mentions that in like the 90s.
Yeah, so the 90s is like a turning point in this is like 94 is when that book came out. When historians, when it was okay to talk about gay history prominently, right, and to think about that as its own kind of important historical line of inquiry. But like, how did we get there? Like, what are other things that sort of help us to get to that point? Trey, yeah.
Like Mazda said in the last section, there is a shift from top-down perspectives of the elite to a bottom-up perspective of history. So they wanted to focus more in like the perceptions of ordinary people.
Okay, I can go with that, right? So this a big shift happening over the course of the 20th century has been looking at the people, sort of looking at the majority of human existence as opposed to just those who are on the top, and seeing what we can learn about those different groups that make up that majority. Yes, definitely. What else do we have? Steps along the way. Kyle?
Yeah, so like two of the milestones that I think of, and obviously there's far more in between and outside of these, but I see the Industrial Revolution and like sort of the history we looked at today of study of like the plight of the people and the laborer, and then as well, and this is a big jump, but into like the 1960s and the social revolution of the 60s in America. I think those are two large points where like the view of history and different perspectives were considered.
Okay, right. So we're, I think that what you're seeing here is the discovery of the people, right, as a historical subject, and then the rediscovery of the people again, but this time as a force for change or as a group that has actually influenced history and not just been oppressed as a majority. And I also think that one thing that was interesting that we see here in each of these, in the Gay New York book, or in she also talked about China, for example, about the importance of the feminine ideals for the Qing dynasty, for example, in old China, or the anti-traditional feminism of this new, the new regime in the 1920s, is that these microcosms of the family or the ideas people have about what constitutes homosexuality and what doesn't, and what constitutes appropriate behavior and not, these have much bigger consequences for society as a whole. And so, the thinking about society in terms of right and wrong, good and bad, and then using those binaries to categorize people, those have had a huge influence on society. And I had not known before I read Gay New York that there was this, for example, she mentions that the sailors and the various workers, many of them were immigrants, were sexually active with men, and that was okay, and it became less okay later on. So this, I think, it tells a lot about American manhood, and a lot about the way things have changed, and not necessarily in a way that was predictable in 1920. So each of these kinds of histories that we see, that we've discovered in this new bottom-up history, this new history of the people, it allows us to take new things and gain new insight about the whole, right? And about the structure of the whole, about the nature of power relationships or dynamics in the whole, and those kinds of things. So I think it's, the class, as we'll see as we keep reading books in the class, we'll see quite a bit and quite often that there is now an ability to look at very small pieces of sort of units or frames of reference, or scales, or those kinds of things, and to learn a lot from those scales about the big picture. And so we'll keep doing that, and the more we can include people who have been marginalized and excluded from those pictures, the better our big picture, the better our big picture understanding will become. So thank you all for that. Have a good weekend, and I will see you on Tuesday.
Bye, Professor. See you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice weekend.
Bye.